A devoted family man suddenly disappears.
He promised to come get the kids, and he never came.
She contacted his family, his friends. She was actively trying to find him.
A search reveals evidence of a violent crime scene.
There was blood on the floor, blood on the walls.
The amount of blood that we found in that room, I don't know how anybody could have walked out of there like that. At this point, it went from a missing person to, okay, we need to find his body.
Detectives question both his wife and his girlfriend.
They do not like each other. They have clashed in the past.
You really thought he was on top of the world, right? Dumbass bitch.
If she couldn't handle, nobody could.
But the investigation reveals a more tangled web of lies and a family who do anything for each other.
His sister knew, his father knew, they knew.
Blood is thicker than water. If they were going down, they were going down together.
Georgetown, South Carolina is a small town where everyone seems to know each other's business. But on March 9th, 2017, one resident somehow disappears without a trace.
Brittany Green came in to the Georgetown County Police Department to report a missing person. This man is Leon Harrison Jr., JR as everybody called him.
Brittany Green had dated JR. They were both in each other's past, but they had 2 children together.
She says the last time she spoke to JR was on February 25th, nearly 2 weeks ago.
I told the detective that he promised to come get the kids, and he never came. He didn't reach out and say why. We was very, very concerned because we know that wasn't like him.
She called JR multiple times. She contacted his family, his friends. She was actively trying to find him through the community.
However, no one close to JR has seen or heard from him in the last 2 weeks either.
The detective did ask why we took so long to come to the police about him. I told them because JR lost his phone one point in time, and it took him like a couple of days to come to the house to let us know. But I just thought that that could have been the case, or he got caught up with work. But as the days went by, we knew something had to go wrong. That's when really we started to get worried.
Leon J.R. Harrison was born and raised in Georgetown, South Carolina. His early life was shaped by tragedy.
JR lost his mom at an early age, and he lived with his father. He has like 3 brothers and a sister, and JR was close to all of his siblings. Most people would describe JR as jokey. He got a funny, big personality.
After high school, JR enlisted in the military.
He did about 3 years in Korea, and then he did a year in Iraq.
Between deployments, JR spent time with his family in Georgetown. On one of those visits, he met a young woman named Brittany Green.
JR and I met through his cousin. His cousin told me that JR had a crush on me and told JR that I had a crush on him. What attracted me to JR is his smile, his personality, the way that he loved on his loved ones.
The Army sent JR back to Korea, but his heart stayed in South Carolina. When his 4 years of service were complete, he and Brittany picked up right where they left off.
When he came home, that's when we got serious. It was the year 2005. and I found out I was pregnant. And he was excited. He was ready to be a father and build a family.
After the birth of their son, they moved in together. Within the year, Brittany was pregnant with their second child.
He always said he wanted a boy first and then his girl, and that's what we got, so he was happy about that.
In 2012, after 11 years together, JR decided to propose. But he didn't get the answer he was hoping for.
I still felt like I was too young to be married. So he said okay. And gave me enough time, but we separated because I stepped out on him. And then he found out. I knew he was heartbroken, but he just said that we just had to go our separate ways and that he'd still be there for me and the kids.
He remained a good friend to Brittany and a better father to the kids.
By 2013, JR was looking for love again. He found it in 29-year-old Tiesh Rhue, a single mother of 5 working as a security guard at the Georgetown steel mill. Like JR, she wanted someone to build a life with, and within a year, they married.
JR was definitely a family man. That's what he wanted, marriage and stuff like that. So he was happy with his life at the moment.
Over the next 3 years, JR did his best to balance the responsibilities of 2 families.
During that time, he was more so just focused on his kids and not really being friends with me because he was married. She didn't want a friendship with us. It was kind of like, I'm going to respect my wife and just it's going to be about the kids.
That devotion to his children is why loved ones are so troubled by his disappearance.
I really had to talk to my kids every day and just pray with them and give them hope. Maybe he's out of town, on a job or something.
It's been 12 full days since the last time anyone has seen or talked with JR. So that has got to have a real doom-like effect on anyone that's looking.
As a part of the missing persons report, Brittany provides detectives with every detail she can think of.
Brittany starts talking about JR's identifiable markings on his body, and one in particular is going to be a tattoo on his forearm that is a remembrance to his mother.
We asked him, is he currently married? Is he seeing anybody? And she did tell us that he was married to Tiesh Rhue. We looked up her information. She was actually at work as a security guard at the steel mill.
Police immediately contact Tiesh to see if she knows where JR is.
She says, I've been out of town. I had to go pick up my kids in D.C. She did add that she was concerned about not hearing from JR. She said that she did reach out to JR several times by calls and text, but to no avail.
Tiesh comes in after her work shift for a formal interview. She says she hasn't heard from JR since she left town 17 days ago.
Okay, why did you not come to the police department or call and report it missing?
I just assumed that this was just another escapade.
According to her, they'd agreed to have an open marriage. But she recently caught him breaking the rules of their arrangement.
Tiesh was okay with Leon having a relationship outside of their marriage so long as it didn't become where he would call her his girlfriend.
She says that she suspects that he is involved with another woman.
According to Tiesh, his cheating caused them to separate about 6 weeks ago, but recently they began to patch things up.
they started to reconnect. They went back and forth, and she kept saying that she wanted him back in her life.
Tiesh explains that on the night JR vanished, they'd made plans to try and reignite their romance.
So on February the 25th, at about 10 o'clock at night, JR comes over to her house with her kids, her brother, and her dad there.
Tiesh says she was working late that night and raced home right after her shift was over. But when she got there, she found JR talking to someone else on the phone.
I realized that he was holding to another female. I was kind of upset and angry at that.
And the altercation ensues, and she tries to take the phone from him. After the argument, he goes inside, grabs his belongings, and he left down the sidewalk. And that was the last time she seen him.
Phone. Anybody told you was telling anybody on the phone?
Yeah, that girl, Rosario.
Coming up, investigators learn the details of a volatile romance.
It was the wife, and she started talking to me.
And a suspect emerges.
Do you have any idea of anyone that would have wanted to do harm to JR? And immediately she says yes.
"12 days after J.R. Harrison went missing, his wife, Tiesh Rhue, explains to detectives that the last time she saw him, they'd argued about the terms of their open marriage, and he stormed off into the night.
I didn't stop him because usually it's not getting me anywhere doing it. If he's going to leave, he's going to leave.
Okay.
Like I said, it happens so often. I'm just used to it.
How about your brother or your dad? Did they hang out that night? Did they leave?
Not that I know of. When this situation happened, both of them did come in and ask me if I was okay. And I said, I'll be fine. And I went to sleep.
Investigators asked Tiesh about the woman JR was speaking to on the phone, Rosario.
I was angry at the time that he was still talking to the same female. I've tried to reach out to this female once before when I first found out about her in June.
She believed Rosario was a person who he was having a relationship with, and she even went into to describe her as the crazy girlfriend.
She tells them that Rosario is jealous and that she believes that Rosario meant to harm JR.
Detectives run a record search for Rosario's last known address. She agrees to come to the station and answer questions about JR's disappearance.
She says, I haven't seen JR either, but we were romantically involved and were really hitting it off well.
She was working as a cashier for McDonald's. And so he comes through the drive-thru at 4 a.m. one morning and was just starstruck.
Rosario did seem very concerned, very heartbroken that he was missing and that she had not heard from him.
Why had you not come forward before we contacted you to say, hey, something's wrong? I don't know what going through that.
Well, for one, because he's still married, and I didn't want to interfere in that. And like I said, at first I thought it was just maybe he was embarrassed or trying to let it die down because he knows his wife is like crying out loud.
Rosario says the last time she saw JR was also Saturday the 25th, 12 days before he was reported missing. They spent the day together. Then around 9 p.m., she dropped him off at his father's house. A short time later, she got a call from JR's phone, but he wasn't the one on the other end.
This had been after 10 by now, and it was the wife, and all I said was hello, and she started talking, which I thought y'all was smarter than me.
Tiesh was ranting and raving and cursing her basically saying, you think you're going to have my man, and I can tell you that you're not.
How long has she known about you?
Well, me and him have been dating personally like a year and 3 or 4 months, so I say at least 2 months.
Tell me about when she found out about you, how that got out.
If I'm not mistaken, he told her.
Is this the first time you ever talked to this woman?
No.
Oh, okay.
And I hung up the phone, and then she called back maybe like 5 minutes after, and I didn't answer.
Those calls went to voicemail. So police were able to get those, and obviously it shows Tiesh is very angry.
You really thought he was on top of the world, right? Dumbass bitch.
She says, you think I'm scared of you, and then uses a lot of expletives to explain how JR loves her and is staying with her.
Rosario says she never heard from JR again.
She had called him numerous times with no answer, which was, you know, one of the reasons why she believed they had just got back together, and she was going to respect that.
As one of the last questions that they would have is, do you have any idea of anyone that would have wanted to do harm to JR? And immediately she says yes.
He once mentioned that his wife said that, you know, if she couldn't have him, nobody could.
According to Rosario, if Tiesh wanted to get rid of JR, there's one person who would happily do it for her.
The wife's father, Alex, they don't get along because he's always like putting the mix of their issues in their marriage.
After concluding Rosario's interview, there is no evidence suggesting she was involved in the disappearance of her boyfriend, J.R. Harrison.
Rosario is saying, no, I'm not the violent person that Tiesh makes me out to be. That's not me.
You have Rosario throwing in Alex Jr. into the mix, also alleging that he and JR have an entire history of beef between each other.
Hoping to gain neutral insight, detectives talk to the other woman in JR's life, the mother of his children, Brittany Green.
Do you know of anybody who would be against him?
Alex, her brother.
They didn't get along?
Well, we was going through separation a couple months last year. Then he went to his father's house, Alex came over there, loud him out, man in the door, went to find him. Alex started home with Shetty.
Police went and talked to a lot of the family members, sort of painting the same picture, a really volatile, terrible relationship between JR and Alex Jr.
Investigators run a background check on Alex Jr.
He's got a conspiracy charge, an armed robbery charge, so he does have violent tendencies in his past that really made the police want to talk to him.
They also need to get a look inside the Rhue family's home. It's the last place anyone saw JR, and one of the places he would occasionally stay before he disappeared.
He was in and out of the house. He also was living with Rosario at this point in time.
Police obtain a search warrant, and on the evening of March 10th, Alex Rhue Sr., Tiesh's father, grants them access to the residence.
At the rear of the house was actually Miss Tiesh, Rhue, and JR's bedroom. Immediately, what looked out of place is that there was a rug over a carpeted area.
They pulled up the rug, and what the rug was covering was a space of carpet that had been cut out.
On the carpet padding are these brownish reddish stains, which is consistent with dried blood.
So at this point, we started looking everywhere. We pulled out off all the bed linens, we checked the box springs, we checked the frame of the bed.
On the mattress, there's a ginormous pool of blood that barely even looks like it's cleaned up.
There's something called luminol that reacts to blood, and it'll turn a different color if it's got the proteins of the blood in it.
You start spraying around and you get the room lighting up like Christmas.
There was blood on the floor, there was blood on the walls, on the bed.
I mean, the amount of blood that we found in that room, I don't know how anybody could have walked out of there like that. It went from a missing person to, okay, we need to find his body because somebody did something very violent to him, and it happened in that bedroom.
The following day, March 11th, investigators re-interview Tiesh.
Okay. And we found some stuff in the house that's very alarming, okay? In the room, we found 2 pieces of missing carpet.
Yeah.
They had spots on them, and we tested spots, and they tested positive for blood. Do you have any reason why?
Those pieces of carpet was missing before me and my husband even separated. He cut it out. He said he was going to replace the carpet completely.
Okay. But there was blood on the mattress, too. That soaked all the way through.
Yeah, from me being on hurt. It's my blood.
But we're going to test it. We're testing it off the test.
Absolutely fine with me.
Tiesh's statement doesn't explain the placement or amount of blood investigators found, but they decide not to confront her with that just yet.
They go back to her brother, Alex Jr.
Well, we've been told that they hated each other. They absolutely hated one another. They hated each other's guts.
I don't believe that.
They said, well, where is your brother at? And she says, I haven't seen my brother since March 8th.
March 8th was 3 days ago and 1 day before JR was reported missing. Investigators suspect Tiesh might be covering for Alex Jr., so they return to the Rhue home to talk with their father and see if he'll tell a different story.
We know that Leon was there at the house around 10 o'clock. Did you see him on that night?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was your son Alex there too?
Yeah, because he was getting ready to go out.
Okay, he was getting ready to go out. Did he say anything about seeing him?
Not to me, he did.
Okay. Does your son Alex and Leon get along?
Seems like they got along real well.
Just like Tiesh, he tells police he hasn't seen Alex Jr. in days. But detectives aren't buying his story.
We didn't really know if he was telling us the truth. That he was possibly covering up for his children or giving a false alibi was definitely an idea.
Coming up, the discovery of a body confirms detectives' worst fears.
Somebody just doesn't tie themselves up and throw themselves in the river.
And a witness comes forward.
He started talking. He's like, yeah, because I'm laying there, get all everybody. Look like a rap.
On March 12, 2017, 3 days after J.R. Harrison was reported missing, investigators receive an urgent call.
The police department received information that morning that a property owner located what appeared to be a body floating in the Black River right by his dock, which would have been probably about 10 to 15 miles from the city.
The sheriff's office and DNR officers responded to the scene. They get a boat and they do a recovery.
Rescuers find the body of a black male floating in the water. One feature immediately stands out.
Brittany Green, she told the police about JR's tattoos, and one in particular, a tattoo on his forearm that is a remembrance to his mother. The tattoo was the way that the body was identified.
It's readily apparent by the decomposition of the body that this didn't happen yesterday, that this body has been here for a few days. The decomposition made it very difficult to zero in on the cause and manner of death.
The pathologist is unable to identify a cause of death. But one thing is clear to detectives. This was no accident.
His arms and his legs were both bound with speaker wire.
Somebody just doesn't tie themselves up and throw themselves in the river.
There's no reason to tie up a person that's already dead.
It was our theory that he was still alive when he was tied up, and they grabbed the knots to actually drag him and throw him over the highway into the river.
He'd be bound up, thrown in the water. He was completely defenseless because he couldn't move his arms or his legs. I have never seen nothing as inhumane as this, but I hope I never see that ever again.
Detectives have already gotten statements from Tiesh and Alex Sr., but so far, they've been unable to locate Alex Jr. to question him.
Now, it was very important to talk to Alex Rhue Jr. We need to get an alibi from him, and we need to try to do it, like, now.
Lo and behold, he is locked up in the Georgetown County Detention Center.
He was arrested on an unrelated warrant for stealing some money from a gas station he worked at.
In a strange coincidence, Alex Jr. posted bail that very day, so detectives bring him in to finally get a statement.
We got a body that was brought over, and the last person supposedly that seen him was you and your sister.
I didn't see it. I heard that he was outside. Arthur, it was sister.
JR ever come inside?
I never seen him. If he did, I never said, I was in my room. When I went home, I went straight to sleep. I fell asleep in my clothes off.
Did you ever go outside and make sure everything was okay?
No.
Obviously, this group has gotten their story together. His timeline, his dad's timeline, and Tiesh's timeline are consistent, but there's small holes in it.
When news of JR's murder spreads through the small town, a friend of Alex Jr., Antoine, comes forward with information that shatters the Rhue family's claims.
One day in March, Antoine's brother asked if they could ride to Myrtle Beach to go get some furniture for his girlfriend. Antoine asked Alexander Rhue Jr. if he would go with them. On the way there, JR came up.
He started talking. He's like, yeah, cause I'm laying there, shit off, everybody. Put that right.
Antoine was absolutely dead set that that meant that Alexander Jr. had killed JR.
He told me that his sister knew, his father knew, and they knew. She called him and he took him for a ride.
Antoine's statement gives investigators the probable cause they need to subpoena the Rhue family's phone records.
We started out with the victim's cell phone and mapped out what they suspected was the day of the crime.
JR's GPS data shows him arriving at Tiesh's house around 10 p.m. At 10:55, he sends a final message.
The last text message that is sent from JR's phone is actually to Rosario. And what that text message says is, I don't love you. I can't be with you anymore. We had an expert come in and distinguish the texting patterns of JR and the actual punctuation and show that it's not typically the way that he texts.
Despite what Tiesh told police, JR's phone never leaves the house. But around 1 a.m., others do.
We have pings from Alex Sr. and Alex Jr. heading north on 701. After that one ping, we have a terminating event on almost all cell phones, leading us to believe that these phones are manually turned off at 2 a.m.
There's a dead period that we are unable to see anything that's going on.
A deactivation of all three phones at the exact same time can only mean one thing. They acted together and conspired to turn off their cell phones all at the same time so that their location could not be tracked. That tells us at that point that they're up to no good, that they have something to hide.
After analyzing all the evidence, detectives are convinced the murder of J.R. Harrison was a family affair.
Tiesh Rhue was not telling the truth about her brother's location or father's location, and then the brother and father wasn't telling the truth about both of their locations.
When lab results come in on the blood found in Tiesh and J.R.'s bedroom, they're even more certain the murder occurred there.
So investigators had to actually go and send this blood to a private lab, and it came back as being JR's blood.
On March 22, 2017, 25 days after JR's disappearance, authorities confront Tiesh with their discoveries.
They are trying to get her to go ahead and come clean.
We looked at any messages, and we see a message that would then come over, I want you with me, with your candles and all that stuff. And we're just curious if that was a lure to get him over there.
It's my husband.
I know, but Nancy's been there for a while. So all of a sudden that day would we get together and get back together, you know what I'm saying?
Okay, first of all, that's absolutely incorrect. As far as luring somebody, I would never lure him to anything. I took care of him.
She is absolutely livid that that was not her intent at all, that that's not what she did. And so she really doesn't give a straight answer.
During the interrogation, Tiesh is given multiple opportunities to change her story.
Your brother and your father's phone was on the move at 2 a.m. Moving away down in the river. Also, can show where your husband's phone, you say he left, but his phone never leaves your house.
That directly contradicts everything that she's saying. And when confronted with that evidence, she says it must be wrong.
Also, and we talked to you about this before, if blood disease has to go out in the car, according to the forensics laboratory, that blood comes back to your husband.
Well, you know, anytime he bled that much, his dad
For a nosebleed?
No, that ain't no nosebleed. He bled as it would at night, but it wouldn't last, okay? And I can tell by the expression on your face that you know something happened in your bedroom. And I think at that point, she started getting very worried.
The net is tightening, and she sees that happening, so she says, I'm not going to give any other statements. I want a lawyer.
Without a confession, detectives fear there won't be enough evidence to ensure a conviction. So they review the cell phone data again.
JR's phone never left the tower that is closest to Tiesh's house. Tiesh never left the house. Yet we have pings from Alex Sr. and Alex Jr. heading north on 701. And in that direction, we have a Walmart.
Police intuition was, let's go see if they stopped at Walmart. You can say a lot of things about them, but they've got good camera systems.
At 1:06 a.m. on February the 26th of 2017, we see Alex Sr. walk into Walmart.
Investigators watch as Alex Jr. appears on camera with his father. He is then seen buying a peculiar item.
This midnight run to Walmart was not groceries or milk or even beer. It was for hydrogen peroxide.
There's nothing that gets blood out of carpet, out of clothes, out of the back of a car better than peroxide.
And there's certainly at this point enough for a magistrate to sign arrest warrants on all 3 co-defendants.
After a 3-week investigation, South Carolina police arrest the Rhue family and charge them with the murder of J.R. Harrison. By April 9th, 2017, Tiesh Rhue, her father Alex Sr., and her brother Alex Jr. have all been placed under arrest for the murder of Tiesh's husband, J.R. Harrison.
And I learned that all 3 of them was arrested for the murder. I was angry. I was mad at the fact that they took my kid's father from them.
Due to the complexity of trying 3 defendants at once and delays due to COVID, the trial doesn't start until 4 years later, on October 11th, 2021.
Almost everything that we had was circumstance. And it was really important to us to show what those circumstances were.
Prosecutors argue that the text history between Tiesh and J.R. show her to be a woman desperately trying to win back her husband. And when she realized she was losing him to Rosario, she snapped.
But I do think it would have been different for her if he was going around and having relationships with multiple different women. But she saw the I love yous. She saw, I can't live without you. And that's really what caused her jealousy to come to a head.
She snapped not because of love. She snapped because of control. She didn't want anybody else to have him. It's our belief that she lured him over there with the promise of sex, but the real purpose was much more sinister, and that was to exact revenge.
We theorized that they got into a fight, Tiesh stabbed JR, and that it wasn't that deep of a wound, but that at that point, she feared that she was gonna go to jail. And so her brother and her dad tied him up, and he started to bleed out at this point. They then wrapped him up and drove him to the bridge and threw his body over.
There's no doubt that Mr. Harrison was definitely killed in the most inhumane way possible.
Tiesh put this in motion, and then her family really stepped up to help her. And our theme in the entire case is blood is thicker than water. If they were going down, they were going down together.
The defense argues that prosecutors have nothing more than speculation.
The primary focus in the case in general was the lack of evidence. They couldn't even determine the cause of death. You would assume that the jury would want to know how a person died in order to determine whether he had been murdered.
After nearly 10 days, the case is handed to the jury to decide.
The jury stayed out for such a long time. It was the longest that I've ever had to wait for a jury to come back. The first verdict that they read out was Alex Sr.'s verdict. On the charge of murder, not guilty. And my heart absolutely dropped.
Alex Sr. was found guilty of obstruction of justice and got probation for his part in this ordeal.
There's no way to explain the way a jury's thinking, but I don't know, maybe it had to do with his age.
It was shocking to us, but we were still waiting on the other two verdicts to be read.
Alex is next, and on Alex, they find him guilty of murder and obstruction of justice. Tiesh, they find her guilty of murder and obstruction of justice.
Tiesh Rhue is sentenced to 45 years in prison. Alex Rhue Jr. receives the same 45-year sentence.
They lost a son, an uncle, a father, a brother, a friend. You got a child out there that's now going to have to go through her life without a father. And that ain't a whole they ever feels.
We celebrate his birthday. We celebrate Father's Day. We got pictures of him around the house, pictures in their bedrooms, memories. We just pray through it, talk through it, and remember the good times and still celebrate him as if he was still here.
It didn't begin with a body. It began with a silence that lasted too long. A house where the lights stayed on past midnight, but no one answered the door. A phone that rang and rang until the sound itself became unbearable. A mother standing in the kitchen, staring at the clock, knowing something was wrong but not yet knowing how wrong it would become. October 1990, Ohio. Cold air, thin wind, the kind that slips through cracks and settles into your bones, the kind that makes everything feel slightly off, even when nothing has happened yet. Lisa Harrow stepped out of the diner at 9:34 p.m. The neon sign behind her flickered once, twice, humming like it was struggling to stay alive. She pulled her jacket tighter, glanced down the empty road, and exhaled a cloud of breath that disappeared almost instantly into the night. It was routine. Same shift, same walk, same quiet town that hadn't changed in decades. Inside, someone laughed. Plates clattered. Life continued exactly as expected. Outside, something waited. No one saw it arrive. No one saw her leave. By morning, her car was still parked exactly where she left it. Driver's door locked, keys missing, everything else untouched. Lisa Harrow had vanished. At first, it was confusion. Then concern. Then something colder. Police arrived before noon. Questions came quickly, overlapping, urgent, but still restrained. Missing person. That's what they called it. That's what they always call it in the beginning, before the word murder starts creeping into conversations that no one wants to have. Her mother said Lisa never stayed out without calling. Her father said she knew better than to disappear. Her brother said almost nothing. Evan Harrow stood in the corner of the living room, arms crossed, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the wall. When asked the last time he saw her, he answered simply, "Yesterday." Nothing more. Search teams were organized by evening. Neighbors, volunteers, people who barely knew Lisa but felt obligated to help anyway. Flashlights cut through the darkness, beams shaking over fields, ditches, empty roads that stretched farther than they should. They called her name. Again. 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 The night swallowed every sound. By the second day, the tone shifted. Missing didn't feel accurate anymore. Because missing implies distance. But Lisa hadn't gone anywhere. Her world was small, contained, predictable. And something had broken inside it. 3 miles outside town, just off a narrow road lined with dying trees, they found her purse. Not tossed. Not hidden. Placed. Carefully. Deliberately. As if someone wanted it to be discovered. Inside, everything was there. Her ID, her cash, a receipt from the diner stamped 9:12 p.m., even a small folded note she had written to herself, something about groceries, something ordinary, something that made the situation feel even more wrong. There were no signs of struggle. No blood. No footprints clear enough to follow. Just an object, sitting in the wrong place, carrying the weight of everything that was missing. That's when the word changed. Abduction. And behind that, unspoken but understood. Something worse. The town felt it immediately. Doors that were once left unlocked now shut tight before sunset. Parents started walking their children to school again. Conversations lowered into whispers whenever Lisa's name surfaced. At the diner, her co-workers avoided looking at the empty space where she used to stand. One of them said she thought she saw a car that night. Dark. Parked across the street. Engine running. She couldn't describe the driver. Couldn't even say for sure it was connected. But it was something. Another witness mentioned a sound. Metal. A sudden slam. Maybe a trunk closing. But the television had been on. The volume loud. Memory blurred into uncertainty. Every detail felt important. None of them led anywhere. Days stretched into weeks. Search efforts slowed, then thinned, then quietly faded. But inside the Harrow house, nothing faded. Lisa's room stayed exactly the same. Her bed remained made, corners tight, untouched. Clothes hung in the closet, like she might return at any moment to wear them again. Dust settled slowly, layer by layer, marking the passage of time more honestly than anyone inside that house was willing to admit. Her mother stopped sleeping. Neighbors said they saw the kitchen light on at 3 a.m., at 4 a.m., at hours when no one should be awake unless they were waiting for something that never came. Her father became distant. Short answers. Hollow eyes. A man shrinking into himself, carrying something too heavy to name. And Evan. Evan stayed. While others left for college, for jobs, for anything beyond the boundaries of that town, he remained exactly where he was. Working odd shifts. Keeping routines small. Avoiding attention. People noticed. Not immediately. But over time. Because grief looks different on everyone. And his didn't look like grief. He never joined the search parties. Never stood outside handing out flyers. Never raised his voice when her name came up. It wasn't what he did. It was what he didn't do. There was a distance there, a quiet detachment that didn't match the situation. Once, someone said they saw him driving late at night near the road where the purse had been found. He denied it. Calmly, without hesitation. And the town accepted it. Because the alternative was uncomfortable. Because suspicion inside a family spreads faster than any rumor. So, they let it go. The investigation slowed. Then stalled. Then stopped. The file was closed, labeled, stored. A cold case. 2 words that feel like an ending, but are really just a pause stretched over years. Time moved forward. The town changed. New businesses opened. Old ones closed. People came and went, bringing with them new stories that slowly buried the old ones. But some things don't disappear. They settle. They wait. They shift just enough to stay hidden. 30 years passed. And then, without warning, something moved. The call came in on a quiet afternoon. No urgency in the voice.
No panique.
Just certainty. I think you're looking in the wrong place. A pause. Then, you should ask the brother. The line went dead.
No trace.
No record. Nothing to hold on to except the words themselves. But sometimes that's enough. Because cold cases don't reopen by accident. They reopen because something refuses to stay buried. The file was pulled from storage. Pages yellowed, edges worn, details frozen in time, waiting to be seen again through different eyes. Detectives read everything. Then read it again. And slowly, patterns began to emerge, not new ones, but ones that had been overlooked. Ignored.
Dismissed.
Evan Harrow's statement was one of them.
Short.
Controlled. Minimal. He claimed he went to bed early the night Lisa disappeared. Said he didn't hear anything unusual. Said he didn't leave the house. At the time, it was accepted.
Now, it didn't fit.
Because buried deep in the reports was a witness statement, almost forgotten. A neighbor. They had seen lights on in the Harrow house past midnight. Movement. Shadows crossing windows. It hadn't mattered then. Now it mattered more than anything. Because if Evan was awake, if he wasn't where he said he was, then the timeline breaks. And once a timeline breaks, everything inside it starts to collapse. Detectives went back to the house. Same structure, same foundation. Time had changed the surface, but not the core. Evan answered the door. Older, thinner, eyes carrying something that wasn't there before, or maybe had always been there, just harder to see. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't seem nervous. If anything, he seemed ready. They asked about Lisa. He nodded.
They asked about that night.
He repeated the same story. Same words, same calm delivery. But this time, there was something else. A delay. Barely noticeable. A fraction of a second where his expression tightened, just enough to suggest something beneath the surface. They asked to come inside. He let them. That alone was different. Inside, the house felt smaller than it should have. Quieter. Like it was holding its breath. They looked around. Walls repainted. Furniture replaced. Signs of time passing in every direction. Except one. The basement door. Heavy.
Solid.
Closed.
Locked.
The latch looked old. Worn from years of use, or years of being kept shut. The detective gestured toward it. What's down there? Evans smiled. Just storage. Can we take a look? A pause. Longer this time. Then.
Keys gone.
Haven't been down there in years. Another pause. And, in that moment, something shifted. Because cold cases don't crack open all at once. They fracture. Slowly. Quietly. Until one small detail becomes impossible to ignore. And standing there, in that house, staring at a door that hadn't been opened in decades, one question pushed its way to the surface. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady. unavoidable. What if Lisa Harrow never left that house? The question didn't echo out loud. It settled.
Heavy, quiet,
Dangerous. Because once it exists, it doesn't leave. It follows you out of the house. It sits in the car beside you. It waits in the silence between two detectives who both know the same thing but haven't said it yet. If she never left that house, then everything else was staged. The purse. The road. The distance. All of it. A story constructed just far enough away to feel real. Just far enough to mislead. They didn't return the next day. They didn't rush. Because rushing breaks fragile truths. Instead, they circled. Background checks, property records, old repair permits, anything that could tell them what had changed and, more importantly, what hadn't. The house was built in the late 1960s. Basement included. Concrete foundation. Standard layout. Nothing unusual. But there was a detail. A renovation permit filed in early 1991. Just months after Lisa disappeared. Not large enough to draw attention. Not small enough to ignore.
interior structural adjustment. No specifics.
No follow-up inspection notes beyond a basic approval. The kind of paperwork that exists just to say something happened without explaining what. They pulled the contractor listed on the form. Retired. Living 2 counties over. He didn't remember the Harrow house at first. Too many jobs. Too many years. But when they mentioned the basement, something shifted. Not recognition. Something closer to discomfort. He said it was a quick job. Cash payment. No questions asked. They asked what kind of work he did. He hesitated. Then gave an answer that felt incomplete. Reinforcement. Some wall work. What kind of wall work? Another pause. Just reinforcement. Memory is a strange thing. Sometimes it fades. Sometimes it protects. They didn't push him further. Not yet. Because they already had enough to return. This time they didn't ask. They brought a warrant. Evan opened the door again. Same expression. Same stillness. But something in his eyes had changed. Not fear. Not panic. Something tighter. Like a man watching a door slowly close, knowing he can't stop it. They showed him the paper. Explained the scope. Basement access. Full search authorization. He nodded. Stepped aside. Didn't argue. Didn't ask questions. That was the first real sign. Because innocent people ask questions. They demand reasons. They react. Evan Harrow did none of that. The house felt different this time. Heavier. Like it knew. The basement door stood in the same place. Unmoved. Unopened. Waiting. One of the detectives tested the handle.
Locked.
They asked for the key again. Evan shook his head. Don't have it. So they did what had been delayed for 30 years. They broke it. The sound was sharp. Louder than expected. It echoed through the house like something cracking open, not just wood and metal, but time itself. The door swung inward slowly. Air moved.
Cold. Stale.
The kind of air that hasn't been disturbed in years. Decades. Flashlights cut into the darkness. Steps creaked as they descended. Each movement deliberate. Controlled. Because whatever was down there had been hidden for a reason. The basement was smaller than expected. Low ceiling. Concrete walls. Minimal storage, boxes stacked along one side, old tools. Nothing unusual at first glance. But the floor was wrong. Not everywhere. Just one section. The concrete there looked newer. Smoother. Slightly different color.
A patch.
Cleanly done, but not perfect. Time reveals what people try to hide. One detective knelt. Ran a hand across the surface. Even without tools, the difference was clear. He looked up.
Didn't say anything. Didn't need to.
The others saw it too. They marked the area.
Called it in.
Within hours, the basement wasn't quiet anymore. Forensic teams, equipment, controlled movement replacing silence. Evan stayed upstairs. He didn't leave. Didn't pace.
Didn't watch.
He sat.
Still.
Hands resting on his knees. As if the outcome had already been decided long ago. The first drill cut into the concrete with a sound that felt almost intrusive. Like breaking into something that had been sealed on purpose. Layer by layer, the surface gave way. Dust filled the air. Time shifted again. And then, the smell.
Faint.
But unmistakable. Not fresh. Not strong.
But there.
Something old. Something buried. The digging slowed.
Careful now. Precise.
Because this was no longer a theory. It was a recovery. Minutes stretched. Then one of the technicians stopped. Hand raised. Everyone else froze. There was something there. Not visible yet. But different. Texture. Color. A shape that didn't belong to concrete.
Tools changed.
Smaller. Gentler. And then,
bone.
Just the edge of it. Pale against the darker soil beneath the slab. No one spoke.
No one needed to.
Because in that moment, the case changed forever. Lisa Rhue wasn't missing. She had never been. She was here. The rest came slowly. Fragment by fragment. A skeleton, incomplete but undeniable. Positioned carefully. Not thrown. Not chaotic.
Placed.
Just like the purse. Deliberate. Controlled. A second scene hidden beneath the first. Upstairs, Evan didn't move. Even when they came up.
Even when they told him.
Even when the words were spoken out loud for the first time in 30 years. We found her. No reaction.
No collapse. No denial.
Just a slow blink. And a breath that seemed heavier than the ones before it. They placed him under arrest without resistance. Hands behind his back. Cold metal closing around wrists that hadn't trembled once. Neighbors watched from a distance. Whispers spread faster than facts. Police cars, lights flashing. A scene that the town hadn't seen in decades, but somehow recognized immediately. Because deep down, the story had never really ended. It had just been waiting. Inside the interrogation room, the air felt tighter. Evan sat across from them. Same posture. Same stillness. But now, there was nowhere left to hide. They laid it out. The timeline. The basement. the remains. Every piece placed carefully in front of him. He listened.
Silent.
Eyes fixed on the table. And then, finally, they asked the question that had been waiting since 1990. What happened to Lisa? A long pause. Longer than any before. Seconds stretching into something heavier. Then he spoke. Not loud. Not emotional. Just steady. Controlled. Like everything else about him. I didn't mean to. The words landed softly, but they carried the weight of 30 years. One sentence. And suddenly, the silence was gone. But what replaced it wasn't relief. It was something darker. Because confessions don't always bring clarity. Sometimes, they open doors that were meant to stay closed. And as Evan Harrow lifted his head for the first time, meeting their eyes without hesitation, it became clear. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far more disturbing. I didn't mean to. The sentence didn't break. It didn't shake. It landed with a calm that felt almost rehearsed, like something that had been waiting years for the right moment to finally be released. The room stayed still. No one rushed to fill the silence. Because silence, in moments like this, is not empty, it's pressure. And pressure forces truth to surface. Evan Harrow kept his eyes forward now. No longer avoiding. No longer deflecting. 30 years of distance had collapsed into a single point in time, and for the first time, he wasn't standing outside it. He was inside it. They didn't interrupt him. Didn't push. Didn't ask another question. Because he had already opened the door. And once a door like that opens, it doesn't close easily. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. His voice remained level. Measured. But underneath it, something shifted, not emotion, not exactly, but a strain like the structure of his control was beginning to stretch. She came home. A simple detail.
Ordinary.
But it changed everything. Because for 30 years, the narrative had been built around her disappearance outside. Now the center moved. Inside the house. Inside those walls. Inside that basement. What time? One detective asked quietly. Evan blinked once. After 10. That didn't match the original timeline. Didn't match the diner logs. Didn't match anything that had been accepted as fact. Which meant one thing. The story had been wrong from the beginning. She said she forgot something, Evan continued. Came back to get it. His hands remained still on the table.
No trembling. No visible tensión.
Just words. They didn't see her leave. Not a question. A statement. Confirming what they already suspected. The diner. The witnesses. The car. All of it built on assumptions. She never made it back out, Evan said. The room tightened again. Because now there was no distance left. No possibility of misunderstanding. She came in through the back, he continued. I was in the kitchen. His eyes flicked once, briefly, as if tracing the memory across space only he could see. She startled me. A pause.
Small.
But significant. And then we argued. The word hung there. Argued. It sounded too light. Too simple. But arguments don't end with concrete floors being broken open decades later. What about? The detective asked. Evan's jaw tightened slightly. First real sign of resistance. Nothing, he said. Then corrected himself. Everything. Another pause. Longer now. Because this part mattered. This was where the story either held together or shattered.
She was leaving, he said.
There it was. A new piece. Unexpected. Sharp. Leaving where? The detective asked. Evan didn't answer immediately. She said she wasn't staying here anymore.
Not with them.
Not with me. His voice lowered just enough to suggest something deeper beneath the surface. She had plans. Plans no one else knew about. Plans that hadn't been mentioned in any report. Plans that changed motive. She said she was going to tell them, Evan added. Tell them what? This time, the hesitation was clear. Visible. For the first time since the interview began, Evan looked away. Not for long. Just enough. But enough. They wouldn't understand, he said. That's not what we asked. Silence again. Thicker now. Because the truth wasn't just buried in the basement. It was buried in him. She said she was going to leave, he repeated, ignoring the question. That she was done. The repetition felt intentional. Like he was trying to keep the story contained. Controlled. But control was slipping. And you didn't want her to go. Not a question. A statement. Evan didn't respond. But he didn't deny it. The detective leaned forward slightly. What happened next? A breath.
Slow.
Measured. Then she turned to walk away. His eyes fixed again on the table.
Not on them.
Not on anything real. Just that point. That's when I grabbed her. There it was. The moment. The line crossed. She tried to pull free, he said. She was yelling. His voice didn't rise. Didn't change. Which made it worse. Because the lack of emotion didn't erase what happened, it amplified it. What did you do? The detective pressed. Another pause. Shorter this time.
Because now the story was moving.
I just wanted her to stop, Evan said. The words were simple. But they carried something darker. I didn't think. He stopped himself. First interruption. First crack. I didn't think it would go that far. How far? Silence. Then she hit her head. The room seemed to shrink. She fell, he added quickly. It was an accident. The word accident landed weak. Unconvincing. Even to him. Where? The detective asked. Evan's eyes flicked again. Counter.
Kitchen.
Upstairs. Not the basement. Which meant there was more. And then, the detective continued. Evan swallowed. Barely noticeable. But it was there. She wasn't moving. Another pause. She wasn't breathing right. His voice softened slightly. Not remorse. Something else. Something closer to realization. I tried to wake her up.
Did you?
Or did you already know? The question stayed unspoken. Because the answer was already forming. And when she didn't, the detective asked. Evan's fingers tightened slightly. The first physical reaction.
Small.
But undeniable. I panicked. That word again. Simple. But it doesn't explain 30 years of silence. It doesn't explain concrete. It doesn't explain a staged disappearance. What did you do, Evan? This time, the question cut deeper.
Direct.
No space to redirect. No room to retreat. He exhaled slowly. Then said it. I took her downstairs. The basement. Always the basement. She was still alive, the detective asked. Another hesitation. Longer. More dangerous. I don't know, Evan said. And that answer felt worse than anything else. Because not knowing isn't the same as trying. It isn't the same as helping. It isn't the same as calling for help. You didn't call anyone. Not a question.
A fact.
Evan shook his head once.
No.
Why not? No answer. Because there isn't one that makes sense. Instead, he continued. I put her down there, he said. I didn't know what to do. The story was unraveling now.
Faster. Messier.
I thought maybe she'd wake up.
Hope.
Or denial. Or something in between. And when she didn't, the final push. The final moment. Evan closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them again. Empty. I covered it. Not her.
It.
As if the act had already stripped away something human. I poured the concrete a few months later. There it was. The missing piece. The renovation. The permit. Everything aligning. You lived above her for 30 years. The statement hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. Evan didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to say. The truth had surfaced. But it didn't feel complete. Because something still didn't fit. The purse. The staging. The distance. You put her purse out there, the detective said. Evan nodded. Why? To make it look like she left. A plan. Simple. Calculated. And the car? I moved it. Of course he did. Every piece placed deliberately. Every detail controlled. For 30 years. The room fell silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't anticipation. It wasn't pressure. It was aftermath. Because the story had been told. Or, at least, the version Evan Rhue was willing to give. But even now, something lingered. Something incomplete. Because confessions close cases. But they don't always close questions. And as the recorder continued to run, capturing every word, every pause, every controlled breath, one thought settled quietly beneath everything else. If this was the truth, why did it feel like something was still missing? The confession should have closed the case. It should have drawn a clean line through 30 years of uncertainty, turned questions into answers, and silence into resolution. But it didn't. Because the more they listened, the more something felt off. Not loud. Not obvious. Just wrong in a way that lingered. Like a detail slightly out of place in a photograph you've seen too many times. Evan Rhue had given them a story. Controlled, contained, almost too precise in its simplicity. An argument.
A fall. Panic.
A cover-up. It fit. But it didn't settle. And detectives who have lived long enough inside cold cases know one thing better than anyone. When something feels incomplete, it usually is. They didn't challenge him immediately. Didn't accuse. Didn't push. Instead, they let the silence stretch again. Because silence has a way of forcing people to fill it. Evan sat there, hands still resting on the table, breathing steady, eyes no longer avoiding but no longer revealing either. He had said what he needed to say. Or what he thought he needed to say. The recorder continued to run. A quiet hum in the background, capturing every second of what was, and what wasn't, being said. One of the detectives leaned back slightly. Changed tone. Not confrontational. Curious. You said she hit her head on the counter. Evan nodded. Yes. You said she wasn't breathing right. Another nod. Yes. And you took her downstairs. Yes. Each answer came quickly. Too quickly. Like a pattern already established. Already rehearsed. The detective let a few seconds pass. Then, the medical examiner disagrees. That was the first real shift. Small. But visible. Evan's eyes flickered. Just once. But it was enough. Because up until that moment, he had been in control of the narrative. Now, something external pushed back. The injury to her skull isn't consistent with a fall from standing height, the detective continued. It's deeper. More focused. No response. Evan's posture remained the same. But something inside it tightened. Barely noticeable. But there. It looks more like impact from a direct blow. Silence.
No denial. No correction.
Just stillness. And in that stillness, the first crack widened. Do you want to explain that? The question hung in the air. Neutral. But sharp. Evan didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted downward again. Back to that fixed point on the table. The place he returned to whenever the story became harder to hold. I told you what happened. Same tone. Same control. But now it felt thinner. Less certain. The detective nodded slowly. As you remember it. That phrasing mattered. Because memory can shift. It can distort. And sometimes it hides things even from the person who carries it. Another pause. Long enough to stretch the tension. Short enough to keep it alive. Then the second push. The position of the remains, the detective said quietly. She wasn't laid down like someone you thought would wake up. Evan's jaw tightened. Again, subtle. But now it was becoming a pattern. She was arranged. The words sat heavily between them. Arms positioned, body aligned. Not random. Not rushed. Deliberate. That doesn't look like panic. No answer. Because there isn't one that fits both truths. Panic is chaotic. Messy. Uncontrolled. What they found in that basement was the opposite. Controlled. Measured. Intentional. You stayed with her, the detective continued. Long enough to do that. Another silence. This one heavier. Because now, the story wasn't just being questioned. It was being dismantled. Piece by piece. Evan inhaled slowly. Then exhaled. His hands shifted slightly. First real movement. Small. But enough to signal change. I didn't know what else to do. The line returned. But it sounded different now. Less convincing. Less stable. Did she die upstairs? The detective asked. No response. Or downstairs. Still nothing. Because the truth sat somewhere between those two spaces.
And he knew it.
They let the question hang. Unanswered. Because unanswered questions create pressure. And pressure reveals truth. Then, a new angle. Tell me about the purse. Evan blinked. A break in rhythm.
Small.
But important.
I told you, he said.
I put it out there. Why there?
No hesitación.
It made sense.
Did it?
3 miles away. A road no one used. A location too specific to be random. Too distant to be convenient. The detective leaned forward slightly. Or was it somewhere you'd already been? That landed. Not loudly, but directly. Evan's eyes lifted this time, met the detective's for a fraction of a second, then dropped again. I don't remember. The first real deflection. Because up until now, he remembered everything. Every movement. Every decision. Every detail. Except this one. Which made it matter more. Let's try again, the detective said, voice still calm. Why that road? Silence. Longer now. More resistant. Because this wasn't about memory.
It was about choice.
I used to drive out there, Evan said finally. There it was. A new piece. Unprompted. Unplanned. Why? Another pause. Then, to think. The answer was simple, but it opened something deeper. How often? I don't know. Before or after she disappeared? Evan didn't answer, because that question connected 2 timelines. And if those timelines overlapped, then this wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't panic. It was something else. Something that existed before that night. Something that had been building. The detective didn't push further on that point. Not yet. Instead, he shifted again. Lisa was planning to leave. Evan's head lifted slightly. A reaction. Yes. You said she was going to tell them something. Silence. There was again. That gap. That missing piece. What was she going to say, Evan? No answer. Just breathing. Slower now. Heavier. Because this question mattered more than anything else so far. This wasn't about what happened. It was about why. And why is always harder. She was going to leave, Evan repeated. That's not what we asked. The tone sharpened slightly. Not aggressive, but firm. Because they were closer now. Closer than they had ever been in 30 years. What was she going to tell them? Evan's fingers pressed into the table. Knuckles whitening just slightly. Another crack. Another sign. She was going to tell them about us. The room shifted instantly. Not visibly, but undeniably. Because that word, us, changed everything. The detective didn't react immediately. Didn't interrupt. Because now, the story had moved somewhere darker. Somewhere deeper. About what, Evan? Silence. Then, She wasn't supposed to. A whisper now. Barely above breath. She said she was done hiding. The pieces began to rearrange themselves. Not into something clearer, but into something far more disturbing. How long? The detective asked quietly. No answer. Evan. A longer pause. Then. Years. The word landed heavy, suffocating. Because now the case wasn't just about a death. It was about everything that led up to it. Everything hidden. Everything buried. Not just under concrete, but inside a family. Inside a house that had kept its secrets too well for too long. She was going to leave, Evan said again. But this time, it sounded different. Not like an excuse. Not like justification. More like a fact he couldn't escape. And you couldn't let that happen. Evan didn't respond. But he didn't deny it either. The silence answered for him. And in that silence, the case shifted again. From accident to something else. Something intentional. Something that had been waiting long before that night in October 1990. The recorder kept running, capturing every word, every pause, every fracture in a story that was no longer holding together. And as the detective sat there, listening, watching, waiting, one realization settled in with quiet certainty. The truth hadn't just been buried in that basement. It had been buried in layers. And they had only just begun to dig. The word us didn't fade. It stayed. Heavy, contaminating everything around it. Because once spoken, it changes the shape of the entire story. Not just what happened that night, but everything that came before it. The room felt smaller now. Air tighter. Like the walls themselves were closing in, reacting to something that should have never existed in the first place. Evan Harrow sat still. But the stillness was different. Before it had been control. Now it felt like containment. Like something inside him had slipped loose, and he was trying, quietly, desperately, to hold it back. She was going to tell them about us. The detective repeated it slowly. Not as a question. As a fact that needed to be understood. What does that mean? Silence. Evan's eyes stayed fixed on the table. But now they weren't empty. They were crowded. With memory. With something that had been locked away for decades and was no longer staying buried. We were close, he said. The words sounded weak. Inadequate. Almost hollow against what they implied. How close? No answer. The detective didn't push immediately. Instead, he shifted. Changed angle. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come out directly. It has to be approached from the side. Did anyone else know? Evan shook his head. No. Your parents? No. Friends? Another shake. No one. Of course not. Because secrets like that don't survive in the open. They live in silence. In routines. In moments that look normal from the outside, but carry something else entirely beneath them. How long did it go on? That question again. Direct. Unavoidable. Evan exhaled slowly. Then, since she was younger. The answer landed wrong. Not just heavy. Wrong. Because it suggested something deeper. Something that didn't begin as a choice. Something that grew in the dark. How young? The detective's voice didn't change. but the weight behind it did. Evan didn't respond.
His jaw tightened.
Eyes closing for just a second longer than before. Then opening again. I don't know.
A lie.
Or a refusal. Maybe both. But the damage was already done. Because the timeline had shifted again. And with it, the nature of everything that followed. She wanted out, Evan said. The words came quicker now. Less controlled. She said she was done, that it was over. His breathing had changed. Not faster, but heavier. Each breath carrying something that hadn't been there before. She said she was going to leave town, start over. Another pause. And tell them. That part again. Always returning to that moment. That threat. Because that was the trigger. Not the argument. Not the fall. But the possibility of exposure. What would they have done? The detective asked. Evan laughed. Not loud. Not real. Just a short, hollow sound that didn't belong in the room. What do you think? No answer. Because the answer didn't need to be spoken. It was already there. In the silence. In the implication. In the reality of what us actually meant. She was going to destroy everything, Evan said. The first real emotion. Not grief. Not regret.
Fear.
But not fear of losing her. Fear of being seen. Of being exposed. Of everything collapsing. And you couldn't let that happen. Not a question. Evan didn't respond. But his fingers pressed harder into the table. The only visible sign of tension. The only sign that the calm was breaking. They let the silence stretch again. Because now, the story wasn't about what happened. It was about why. And why changes everything. You said you grabbed her. Evan nodded. Yes. You said she fell. Yes. You said it was an accident. Yes. Each answer came softer now. Less certain. And then you took her downstairs. Another nod. Yes. The detective leaned forward slightly. Why the basement, Evan? A pause. Longer. More fragile. Because it was quiet, he said. The answer came too quickly. Too easily. But it revealed something else. Not panic.
Choice.
Deliberate. Intentional. You didn't call for help.
No.
You didn't try to take her to a hospital.
No.
You didn't tell your parents.
No.
Each question tightening the space around him. Each answer removing another layer of his original story. You took her somewhere no one would hear her. Silence. Because that was the truth. Not spoken. But undeniable. Was she still alive when you took her down there? The question hung in the air. Heavier than anything that came before it. Evan's breathing slowed. Then stopped for just a moment. Then resumed. I don't know. The same answer. The same deflection. But now it sounded different. Weaker. Less believable. Because everything else pointed in the opposite direction. You don't know, or you don't want to say? No response. Because the line between those two had blurred. Maybe even disappeared. The detective didn't push further. Not directly. Instead, he shifted again. Back to the evidence. Because evidence doesn't hesitate. It doesn't forget. The position of the remains suggests she was placed carefully, he said. Arms aligned, body straight. Evan's eyes closed again. Longer this time. You didn't just put her down there, the detective continued. You arranged her. Still nothing. You stayed with her. Silence. You had time. The words settled slowly. Because time is the difference between panic and decision. Between accident and intent. When Evan finally opened his eyes again, something had changed. The control was thinner. The distance smaller. I didn't want it to look bad. The sentence came out quietly. Almost fragile. But it revealed everything. Not look bad, the detective repeated. Not feel bad. Not be wrong. Just. Not look bad. I thought if she looked peaceful.
He stopped.
Didn't finish.
Didn't need to.
Because the meaning was clear. He wasn't trying to save her. He was trying to manage the aftermath. To shape the image. To control how it would be seen. If it was ever seen. And the concrete, the detective asked. Another pause. I had to, Evan said. Had to. Like it was inevitable. Like there was no other choice. But there are always choices. He just didn't choose them. You lived with that, the detective said. Every day. No answer.
Because what could he say?
That it got easier? That it faded? That it stopped mattering? None of those things would be true. But neither was remorse visible. Not in the way they expected. Because Evan wasn't breaking down. He wasn't unraveling. He was releasing.
Piece by piece.
Layer by layer. But always on his terms. Always controlled. And that control, that need to shape the narrative, was still there. Which meant one thing. They still didn't have everything. Because people like Evan don't give the whole truth at once. They give just enough. Enough to satisfy. Enough to seem complete. But never enough to fully expose themselves. The detective leaned back. Studied him. Watched the way he breathed. The way his eyes moved. The way he held on to certain details and avoided others. And one thought settled in, quiet but certain. There was still something missing. Something critical. Something that explained not just the act, but the pattern. The build-up. The years before. You said it started when she was younger. Evan's eyes lifted again. Slowly. Yes. How did it start? Silence. Longer than any before. Because this wasn't about that night. This was about everything leading up to it.
The part he didn't want to say.
The part he couldn't control once it was out. How did it start, Evan? The question came again.
Softer.
But heavier. Because this was the core. And for the first time since the interrogation began, Evan Harrow looked uncertain. Not defensive. Not resistant. Just unsure. Like he had reached a point where the story he built no longer protected him. And as the seconds stretched and the recorder continued to capture every breath, every hesitation, every fracture in his voice, one realization became impossible to ignore. The night Lisa died wasn't the beginning. It was the end of something that had been happening for years. Something hidden. Something controlled. Something that had finally broken and left a body buried beneath concrete. But the truth behind it, the real truth, was still waiting to be uncovered. The silence after the question was different. Not the silence of someone refusing to answer. Not the silence of someone trying to hide. It was the silence of someone searching through 30 years of memories, deciding which pieces could be released and which ones had to remain buried. How did it start, Evan? The detective repeated the question. The recorder continued running. A small red light blinked steadily, capturing the moment when the past finally began forcing its way into the present. Evan Harrow looked older than he had a few minutes earlier. Not because of age. Because of weight. Some people carry their secrets so long that when they finally speak them, the burden doesn't disappear. It simply changes shape. She was my sister. The answer came quietly. Almost like a reminder. Almost like he was trying to convince himself of that fact before saying anything else. The detective didn't react. Because everyone in the room already knew. Lisa Harrow was his sister. The question was never who she was. The question was what happened between them. What kind of relationship did you have with Lisa? Evan stared at the table. She understood me. A strange answer. Not what was asked. Not what anyone expected. She was the only person who did. The detective watched carefully. Because statements like that often appear harmless. Until you understand what they are hiding. Did your family know how close you were? Evan shook his head. No. Why? Another pause. Because they wouldn't understand. The same phrase. Repeated. A phrase that had appeared again and again. Not as an explanation. As a defense. A wall built around something he knew could never be accepted. The detective placed a photograph on the table. Lisa. 19 years old. Smiling. Alive. A person reduced by time into evidence. She trusted you. Evan looked at the picture. For the first time, his expression changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for someone watching casually. But enough. A flicker. A memory. A reaction. Yes. She came to you when she had problems? Yes. She talked to you about her plans? Yes. She believed you would protect her? A longer pause. Then. Yes. The answer sounded different. Because protection was the word that mattered. Protection. A word that can mean love. Or possession. And in this case, investigators were beginning to understand the difference. When Lisa told you she was leaving, the detective said, "What did you think?" Evan looked away. I thought she was angry. Was she? Yes. Was she wrong? Silence. The question landed harder than the others. Because it wasn't about evidence. It was about responsibility. Evan didn't answer. And that silence said enough. The detective continued. People who want to leave usually have a reason. She didn't understand. Understand what? Another pause. Then. Everything. The answer was vague. Too vague. And detectives knew vague answers often hide specific truths. They returned to the timeline. October 1990. The night Lisa disappeared. The night everything changed. You said she came home because she forgot something. Yes. What did she forget? Evan hesitated. A small detail, but one that mattered. I don't remember. The detective noticed immediately. Interesting. He remembered the argument, the fall, the basement, the concrete, but not the reason she came back, not the thing that brought her through the door. That wasn't random. What did she take when she came inside? Evan didn't answer. Evan. His eyes moved upward. Slowly. A bag. What kind of bag? A backpack. Was it important? Yes. What was inside? Silence. The room changed. Because suddenly there was another hidden object. Another missing piece. Another reason why Lisa returned that night. What was in the backpack? Evan looked down again. I don't know.
A lie.
This time, everyone knew it. Because the answer came too quickly. The detective leaned forward. You expect us to believe you remember everything about her death, but not what she came back for? No answer. The pressure increased. Not through anger. Through logic. And logic is harder to escape. Finally, Evan spoke. Documents. What documents? I don't know. Another pause. Then. Things she needed. The detective stared at him. Because now they had a new possibility. Lisa wasn't just leaving. She was preparing. She wasn't making an emotional decision. She had planned. She had taken steps. And maybe she had known something was wrong. Was Lisa afraid of you? The question was direct. Evan's face remained still.
No.
Are you sure? Yes. Then why was she leaving? No answer. Because those two things couldn't exist together. If she wasn't afraid, why run? If she trusted him, why hide her plans? The detective returned to something from the original investigation. A detail that had seemed insignificant in 1990. A neighbor had reported hearing an argument. Not screaming. Not violence. Just raised voices. At the time, it was dismissed. Families argue. People fight. Normal.
But now?
Nothing was normal. What did Lisa say during the argument? Evan's eyes moved. A tiny reaction. Like he had returned to that room. That moment. She said I ruined everything. The detective waited. What did she mean? No answer. She said you ruined everything. Evan swallowed. She was upset. That's not an explanation. Silence. She knew. Those two words changed the atmosphere. The detective immediately noticed. Knew what? Evan didn't respond. Knew what, Evan? The answer came almost like a whisper. That I wasn't going to let her leave. The room froze. Because there it was. Not an accident. Not panic. Intent. A decision. Before the fall. Before the basement. Before the concrete. The detective didn't rush. Because sometimes the most important confession isn't the one someone gives. It's the one they don't realize they just made. You decided she couldn't leave? Evan stared ahead. I thought I could make her understand. Understand what? That she belonged here. The sentence was quiet, almost impossible to hear. But it carried everything. Possession. Control. The belief that another person's choice could be taken away. The detective looked down at his notes. Then back at Evan. You loved her? A long pause. Yes. The answer came instantly. Too instantly. And you killed her. This time, Evan didn't answer. Because love and violence had collided in the same story. And there was no way to separate them anymore. The interrogation continued for hours. More questions. More contradictions. More pieces of a story that had been hidden behind silence. But one thing became clear. Lisa Harrow's disappearance was not a random tragedy. It was the final moment in a relationship built on secrecy, control, and obsession. A relationship no one knew existed. A truth buried deeper than any evidence. The basement had revealed Lisa's remains. But it had also revealed something else. The real crime didn't begin the night the concrete was poured. It began years earlier. In conversations no one heard. In moments no one saw. In a house where everyone lived together. But no one truly knew what was happening inside. And as investigators continued digging through old records, old interviews, and old memories, another disturbing question began to emerge. If Lisa had been planning to leave, if she had gathered documents, if she had prepared a way out, then maybe she wasn't just running away from her family. Maybe she was running away from Evan. And maybe on that final night in October 1990, she wasn't returning home because she forgot something. Maybe she came back because she had one last thing to say. One last confrontation. One last chance to escape. But she never made it past the walls that had surrounded her for 19 years. And now, 30 years later, those same walls were finally speaking. The walls were speaking. Not with voices. Not with memories. But with evidence. With fragments. With the pieces of a story that had spent 3 decades hidden beneath ordinary life. For 30 years, the Harrow house had looked like any other home on the street. A place where families ate dinner. Where people celebrated birthdays. Where neighbors waved from driveways. But behind those walls was a secret that had survived longer than anyone imagined. And now, investigators were discovering that the night Lisa Harrow disappeared was not just a moment of violence. It was the final chapter of a story that had been unfolding silently for years. After the interrogation ended, detectives returned to the evidence room. The original case file sat open on the table. Yellowed pages. Old photographs. Handwritten notes from investigators who had worked the case in 1990 and never found the answers they were looking for. But now, every page looked different. Because they were no longer searching for a missing person. They were rebuilding a timeline. A timeline that had been hidden in plain sight. The first question was simple. Who was Lisa Harrow before she became a cold case? Not the name on the missing person poster. Not the photograph shown on television. Who was she really? Investigators went back through interviews with friends, classmates, and coworkers. And a new picture began to emerge. Lisa was not the quiet, predictable teenager everyone thought they knew. She was ambitious, independent, and increasingly determined to create a life outside the Harrow home. Friends described a young woman who talked about leaving Ohio. Not because she hated her town, but because she wanted something more. A different future. A different identity. A chance to finally become someone beyond the walls that had defined her childhood. One former classmate remembered something investigators had overlooked. A conversation weeks before Lisa disappeared. Lisa had mentioned she was saving money. She had mentioned a place she wanted to move. And she had mentioned that someone close to her would not accept it. At the time, the statement seemed vague. A family disagreement. Nothing more. But now it carried a different meaning. Because Lisa wasn't just planning a future. She was preparing an escape. The next discovery came from a place no one expected. An old storage unit. The investigation team learned Lisa had rented a small unit outside town several months before her disappearance. It was not in her name. Not directly. The payment records showed a different arrangement. A friend had helped her. When detectives opened the unit, they found ordinary things.
Clothes. Books.
Personal items. Nothing dramatic. Nothing immediately connected to a crime. Until they found the box. Inside were documents. Applications. Addresses. Letters.
Plans.
Proof that Lisa had been preparing to leave. She wasn't dreaming.
She was organizing.
She had dates.
Contact.
A timeline. She had been building a new life quietly while everyone around her believed everything was normal. But there was something else. A journal.
Small.
Black cover. Worn edges. Pages filled with thoughts Lisa never shared publicly. Investigators read every entry carefully. And slowly, they began to understand the fear hidden beneath her words. Not fear of the outside world. Fear of someone inside it. Several entries mentioned Evan. Not by name every time. Sometimes only a single letter. Sometimes a phrase. Someone who won't let go. Someone who thinks they know what's best. Someone who watches everything. The words changed the direction of the case again. Because this was no longer just Evan's confession. This was Lisa's voice. A voice that had been silent for 30 years. And it told a different story. A story where Lisa was not leaving because of anger. She was leaving because she felt trapped. One entry became especially important. Written just days before she vanished. I have to do this soon. If I wait longer, I don't know if I'll ever leave. Investigators stopped there. Because the sentence carried something terrifying. Not uncertainty. Urgency. Lisa believed time was running out. The next step was obvious. They needed to understand Evan's behavior before the murder. Not just after. They interviewed people who knew him. Neighbors. Co-workers. Old friends. And once again, a pattern appeared. Evan had always been described as quiet. But quiet does not always mean harmless. Several people remembered his intense attachment to Lisa. At family events, he stayed close to her. Always nearby. Always involved. At the time, some saw it as protective. An older brother looking after his younger sister. But others remembered something different. Control. A friend of Lisa's described an incident from months before the disappearance. Lisa had planned to meet friends after work. Evan called repeatedly. Multiple times. When she finally answered, he was upset. Not worried. Upset. He wanted to know where she was.
Who she was with.
When she would return. Lisa later apologized to her friends. She said Evan was just being difficult. But the people around her remembered something else. the way she said it. Like she was explaining behavior she had learned to accept. That was the moment investigators realized something important. The murder did not happen in one night. The crime scene was not just the basement. The crime scene was years of pressure. Years of boundaries disappearing. Years of someone believing they had ownership over another person's choices. But there was still one question. Why did no one see it? Why did an entire family live inside that house and miss what was happening? The answer was painful. Because secrets survive best in ordinary places. In homes. Among people who think they know each other. In families where uncomfortable questions are avoided. The Harrows were not a family known for conflict. They were private. They kept problems inside. They believed in appearances. And appearances can hide almost anything. As investigators continued reviewing evidence, they found another overlooked detail from 1990. A phone record. The night Lisa disappeared. One call had been made from the Harrow residence shortly after midnight. The call lasted less than a minute. It was never investigated deeply because at the time, everyone believed Lisa was already gone. But now, the timing was impossible to ignore.
Who made that call? And why?
Detectives traced the number. It belonged to a local hospital. The record showed the call was incomplete. Never connected. Someone had dialed. Then hung up.
Evan was asked about it.
At first, he denied remembering. Then, he changed his answer. He said he was confused that night. He said he might have tried to call for help. But if that was true, why did he hang up? Why did he move the car? Why did he create a false trail? Why did he spend 30 years protecting the secret? The answers were becoming clearer. But clarity did not bring peace. Because every new discovery revealed something darker. Lisa Harrow had not simply been lost. She had been trying to leave. She had been preparing. She had been fighting for a future. And the person standing closest to her had been the one person she needed to escape. The investigation now moved beyond the question of what happened that night. They already knew. The real question was why. Why did Evan believe he had the right to control her life? Why did he believe hiding her would preserve something? And why, after 30 years, did he finally decide to speak? Because detectives knew one thing. People confess for many reasons.
Guilt. Fear. Pressure.
Or sometimes because they believe they are finally ready to tell the story their way. And Evan Harrow was still telling his version. But somewhere inside those old records, those forgotten documents, and those final pages of Lisa's journal, was another truth waiting. A truth that could reveal whether Evan had told them everything. Or whether the biggest secret of the Ohio cold case was still buried. The biggest secret was still buried. Not beneath concrete. Not beneath the floor of the Harrow basement. But somewhere deeper. Inside the gaps between what Evan Harrow admitted and what the evidence continued to reveal. Because investigators had learned something important about cold cases. The truth rarely arrives all at once. It comes in pieces. A forgotten document. A sentence written decades earlier. A witness who finally decides they have carried a memory long enough. And sometimes, a person who realizes the secret they protected was never truly theirs to control. After the discovery of Lisa Harrow's journal, the investigation entered a new phase. The focus was no longer only on Evan. It was on the entire environment surrounding the crime.
The home.
The family. The years leading up to October 1990. Because Lisa's final months told a story that was impossible to ignore. She was preparing. She was afraid. And she believed leaving was her only option. Detectives returned to the Rhue residence with a different purpose. The first search had been about finding evidence. The second was about understanding the place itself. A house is more than walls. It holds routines, patterns, memories. And sometimes it holds the exact moment when something changed. They examined Lisa's bedroom again. The room that had remained frozen for years. At first glance, nothing stood out. A bed. A desk. Old shelves. But forensic investigators noticed something unusual. One drawer had been repaired. Recently. Not recently in the normal sense, but compared to the rest of the untouched room. The repair appeared to have happened after Lisa disappeared. The question was immediate. Why? The drawer was carefully examined. Inside, hidden beneath the bottom panel, they found a small envelope. No name. No label. Just a sealed piece of paper that had survived 3 decades. The handwriting was Lisa's. The room went silent. Because every new piece of Lisa's voice felt like opening a door that had been locked since 1990. The letter was short. Not a confession. Not a goodbye. Something else. A warning. Lisa wrote that she had discovered something about Evan. Something she believed could hurt the family. She wrote that she had tried talking to him. Tried making him understand. But he refused. The final sentence was the one detectives focused on. I don't know what he will do when he realizes I'm serious. Those words changed everything. Because they suggested Lisa was not simply planning to leave. She was anticipating a reaction. A dangerous one. The letter raised a new question. What exactly had Lisa discovered? Investigators returned to Evan's interrogation. They replayed every minute, every pause, every change in his voice. They searched for the moment where the truth slipped through. And they found one. A small detail. During his confession, Evan mentioned Lisa was going to tell them. Not tell someone. Tell them. Plural. That meant there was more than one person involved. Or more than one person who needed to know. The detectives brought Evan back for another interview. This time, they didn't begin with accusations. They began with Lisa's letter. They placed it on the table. Watched his reaction. The change was immediate. Not shock. Recognition. He knew it. He knew that handwriting. He knew that paper. And for the first time, the calm expression he had maintained began to weaken. You knew about this letter? Silence. No. The answer came too quickly. The detective waited. Then asked again. You knew she wrote this. A longer pause. I forgot. Another lie. And everyone in the room knew it. Because people forget dates. They forget conversations. They forget details. But they don't forget evidence that could destroy them. Why was she afraid of you? Evan looked down. She misunderstood. A familiar frase. A familiar defense. The detective leaned forward. Everyone misunderstands you, Evan? No answer. Your sister. Silence. Your family. Silence. Everyone except you. The words stayed there. And for the first time, Evan looked angry. Not explosive. Controlled. But real. She didn't know what she was talking about. That sentence revealed more than he intended. Because it wasn't denial. It was dismissal. As if Lisa's fear was not something to understand. Only something to correct. Investigators began looking deeper into Evan's history. Not criminal records. There were none. Not arrests.
None.
But behavior.
Patterns.
People often imagine dangerous individuals as obvious. Violent. Unstable. Easy to identify. But many cases are different. The warning signs are smaller. A need for control. A refusal to accept boundaries. An obsession disguised as concern. Former coworkers described Evan as someone who hated losing control.
He needed routines.
Needed things done his way. A supervisor remembered an argument years earlier when Evan became unusually upset because another employee changed his schedule. Nothing violent happened. No crime. But the reaction was remembered. The intensity. The inability to let go. And suddenly, detectives began seeing the same pattern repeated in a different context. Lisa's choices. Lisa's future. Lisa's independence. Everything she wanted became something Evan believed he had the right to influence. Meanwhile, the defense team began preparing their response. They argued that Evan had confessed. That he cooperated. That the killing was an accident. That he had lived with the guilt for decades. But prosecutors saw something different. A man who didn't simply hide a death. A man who constructed a disappearance. A man who created distance between the crime and the victim. A man who made sure Lisa would be searched for everywhere except where she actually was. The public reaction was immediate. The town that had carried the mystery for 30 years was forced to confront a painful reality. The answer had been inside the family all along. Neighbors who once remembered Lisa's disappearance now remembered something else. Small moments. Things they ignored. Things that seemed meaningless at the time. A tense conversation outside the house. An argument heard through a window. Lisa looking uncomfortable when Evan entered a room. The human mind does something strange with disturbing details. It explains them away. Because accepting the truth too early is sometimes harder than believing a lie. As the trial preparations continued, investigators found one final piece of evidence from the original investigation. A photograph. Taken in 1990. The Harrow house. The backyard. The basement entrance. Nothing unusual. Except in the corner of the image. A small pile of construction materials. The same type of material later found in the basement renovation. The photo had been taken months before anyone knew the basement mattered. At the time, it was ignored. Now, it became another piece in the timeline. Another indication that the cover-up began quickly. Not months later. Not accidentally.
Quickly.
The question became unavoidable. How long did Evan plan to hide Lisa? Hours? Days? Or was the decision made the moment he realized she was gone? The investigation was no longer chasing a mystery. It was reconstructing a mindset. And that was always the hardest part. Because evidence can show what happened. But understanding why requires looking into places where facts become uncomfortable. Where choices become impossible to justify. And where a family's secret becomes something much larger. As the town prepared for the case to finally reach court, one thing became clear. Lisa Harrow had spent 30 years as a missing person. A name on a file. A photograph on a wall. A question without an answer. Now her story was changing. She was no longer the girl who disappeared. She was the person who tried to leave. The person who tried to speak. The person whose final warnings were ignored until it was too late. But even after everything uncovered, one mystery remained. The phone call. The anonymous tip that reopened the case. The voice that said they were looking in the wrong place. The voice that pointed investigators toward Evan. Because someone knew. Someone had information. Someone had waited 30 years before finally speaking. And detectives still didn't know who. The cold case was no longer about finding Lisa. They had found her. Now it was about finding the person who had been watching all those years. The person who knew the truth. And decided to stay silent. The tightening grip of suspicion began to squeeze the remaining breath out of the meticulously fabricated facade that had protected the perpetrator for over 3 decades, transforming what once felt like an impenetrable fortress of silence into a crumbling monument of inevitable exposure as the cold, hard logic of forensic genealogy and modern criminal profiling finally converged upon the very heart of the family network that had harbored, consciously or unconsciously, the architect of the 1990 Ohio nightmare, sending shockwaves through the local community as the realization dawned that the monster they had feared for a generation was not some faceless drifter lost to the mists of interstate highways, but someone intimately woven into the daily fabric of their lives. Someone who sat at holiday dinners, exchanged polite nods across manicured lawns, and shared bloodlines with the very people grieving at the gravesides, a chilling realization that tore open old wounds and forced a complete reevaluation of human trust in a world where betrayal wears a familiar face and evil wears the mask of normalcy, driving investigators to execute a series of high-stakes, pre-dawn maneuvers designed to trap the suspect before any last-minute escape hatch could be utilized, deploying tactical units through the quiet suburban streets under the cover of a freezing morning fog that mirrored the atmosphere of that fateful night in 1990, surrounding the target residence with military precision while tension hung thick in the air and seasoned detectives braced themselves for the final confrontation with a man who had successfully outrun his past for 30 years, only to be ambushed by the unstoppable ghosts of his own making, a dramatic climax that played out like a cinematic thriller come to life. As the front door was breached, sirens pierced the suburban stillness, and the cold reality of handcuffs clicked shut around wrists that had orchestrated a brutal homicide in the shadows of a fading century, instantly obliterating the quiet illusion of peace and plunging the suspect into a whirlwind of legal reckoning from which there was no turning back. No technicality strong enough to save him, and no amount of denial capable of shielding him from the crushing weight of a DNA profile that screamed his identity across the decades with the undeniable clarity of absolute truth, signaling a monumental triumph for the cold case division and providing a long-sought spark of vindication for the generations of law enforcement officers who had passed the torch of this investigation down like a sacred, agonizing heirloom, refusing to let the victim fade into anonymity or allow a murderer to die a free man, thereby rewriting the narrative of justice in the American Rust Belt and proving once and for all that time is no match for the relentless pursuit of accountability, leaving the populace to grapple with the dizzying aftermath of a secret unmasked and a nightmare finally brought out into the open air of day. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room hummed with a low, oppressive drone that seemed to mirror the mechanical ticking of a clock running out of time for a man who had spent 30 years believing he had successfully outsmarted the universe. While across the metal table sat detectives whose eyes carried the weary authority of a generation spent chasing shadows, now anchored by the undeniable, gleaming weight of a DNA match that needed no words to speak its terrifying truth, a genetic signature pulled from microscopic traces left behind in the freezing Ohio darkness of 1990 that now served as an unbreakable chain binding the suspect to a crime he thought was buried beneath mountains of forgotten history and deliberate deception, forcing him to confront not only the cold steel of the legal apparatus, but the suffocating echo of his own suppressed panic as the silence in the room stretched like an elastic band pulled to its absolute breaking point, threatening to snap under the immense pressure of an accusation so monstrous and precise that even the most rehearsed alibis dissolved instantly into dust, revealing a shattered facade where a calculating killer once stood tall, now reduced to a trembling silhouette cornered by the relentless march of forensic innovation, echoing the collective heartbreak of a family that had waited half a lifetime for this exact second of undeniable reckoning, where every unanswered question from decades past hovered in the air like a phantom presence demanding immediate satisfaction, pushing the interrogation into a psychological chess match of epic proportions where every twitch, every swallowed gulp, and every avoided gaze was meticulously recorded by hidden lenses capturing the slow-motion collapse of a decades-old cover-up that had poisoned the very roots of a lineage, demonstrating with chilling clarity that no matter how deep you bury your sins, and no matter how many years you manage to walk among the living with a smile on your face and blood on your hands, the modern convergence of science and unyielding human persistence will always find a way to drag you back into the harsh, unforgiving light of day to face the music you tried so desperately to silence forever. The final gavel of justice fell with a deafening resonance through the crowded courtroom, shattering the lingering echoes of a 30-year nightmare and bringing a profound, hard-fought closure to one of the most haunting cold cases in the history of the American Midwest. As the full weight of a life sentence crashed down upon the shoulders of a man who had traded his humanity for a shroud of deceit, finally granting the grieving family of the victim the solemn peace they had fought for through decades of tears, unanswered prayers, and an unyielding refusal to let the darkness swallow the memory of their loved one whole, sealing an extraordinary chapter of criminal investigation that will forever stand as a monument to the unbreakable partnership between relentless human determination and the revolutionary power of modern forensic science, proving to the world that time cannot heal all wounds when justice is left undone, but rather that time itself can become the ultimate weapon in unmasking the monsters who walk among us in broad daylight, hiding behind masks of normalcy until the day science catches up to their sins, dragging them out of the shadows and forcing them to look into the eyes of accountability just before the iron cell doors slam shut for all eternity, leaving behind a legacy of hope for every families still waiting in the dark for their own miracle, and turning the quiet streets of Ohio from a landscape of haunting shadows into a testament of enduring truth, where the ghosts of 1990 can finally rest, knowing that the debt has been paid in full, the balance restored, and the nightmare brought to its definitive, righteous end under the blazing light of undeniable justice.